the chief of the tribe at the time rode up on his horse, and he was sitting there talking to Alan, and he came over and talked to me. And when I'm in regalia, you're kind of in character, and it's very stern, and I don't smile, I don't talk, I'm kind of in character. But he rode up to me, and he looked me in the eye, and he reached over and he shook my hand, and he said, "I want to tell you how grateful I am for what you do." And when he said it, a tear literally was rolling down his cheek. And he said, "Because of you, Osceola rides again."
It's Third and Nole. We came together, all three of us reaching for one common goal. This is our show. Listen, you might get perspective of something that you didn't know. We gonna go all the way real with the topics. When you see Witty, P. Austin, and Crockett, pressure good blisters, we stay in the pocket. Picture the run to the quarterback option. Organic process, listen and watch us. Everyone welcome, this is our casa. First and goal, second we throw. Short a few yards, Third and Nole. Third and Nole. Third and Nole.
Hey, welcome back to another edition of Third and Nole. This is a really special edition, I guess, for us. I'm super excited about, what lies ahead. And the conversation that we're going to have today is one unlike I've ever been a part of. And I hope you all can appreciate kind of what we did in order to bring this together. So Croc, Phil, I'll tell you real quick, our special guest tonight is Drake Anderson. And Drake, I'll tell you, we were on a really consistent schedule. And that the playoff snub gutted me. It gutted us. And we really kind of hit a pause. And it's kind of the off season and stuff. And so we're really kind of getting back in the groove of getting these out more regularly. But without any further ado, I want to introduce Drake Anderson to our podcast tonight. And we're going to have him for a little while. You guys kind of know our angle as fans who just kind of love Florida State, love everything about Florida State. And I think tonight is going to be something different, not a typical interview, if you will. Drake, I want you to introduce kind of who you are and really what your tie to Florida State is, and then we'll go into some questions specifically.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Thank you all for having me on. It's been a little bit of a trouble to get here. I'm glad you guys were with me, and we were able to work out some time. As Chris said, my name's Drake Anderson. I was Chief Osceola for FSU from 2009 through 2013. I was born and raised in Alabama, and rode horses, rodeoed, I team roped, and I broke and trained horses in Alabama. And as I was growing up, all I wanted to do was be a horse trainer. That's what I grew up wanting to do, is be a cowboy. And my dad, of course, is pushing me to go to college, and I had the opportunity to rope with some really good guys in Alabama. My mentor that really taught me everything I know about horses, his name was Terry Dennard, and he was an announcer for the High School Rodeo Association in Alabama. So as I'm growing up and I'm rodeoing and learning to ride horses and doing all this stuff, I knew very little about Florida State. I'd heard of Bobby Bowden before. He's kind of one of those figures that you kind of just know who he is. Him and Bear Bryant, you know who they are. But I was not a fan by any means. I grew up, like I said, riding and rodeoing, and that's all I wanted to do. And I had a scholarship lined up to Troy State, which used to be, I guess it's Troy University now. It used to be Troy State, and then also Mississippi State. And they both have NCAA collegiate rodeo associations. And so I had partial scholarships lined up to go team rope at one of those two schools. And as I was trying to kind of pick where I wanted to go, like I said, I really just wanted to ride horses and rodeo and train horses, because I was making a really good living as a junior, senior in high school. You get $800 or $900 a month, and you're riding 4 or 5 horses at a time. All of a sudden, it looks pretty appealing not to go to college. So my dad was pushing him to get education. So the Durham family contacted my mentor, Alan Durham, like you mentioned. Bill founded the program, and Alan runs it now. And Alan contacted my mentor, Terry, and he's like, "Man, this is what I'm looking for. I need a guy that can represent FSU, that can do X, Y, Z. Do you know anybody? Do you have anybody in mind that you could refer me to?" And like I said, Terry was an announcer for the High School Rodeo Association, and I didn't compete in that circuit. but he was like a father to me. And so Terry talked to Alan. He said, "Man, I got a kid that you need to meet." And out of the blue, Alan calls my dad, arranges a meeting, and he comes up to Terry's ranch, and he introduces himself, and he shows us a video of Chief Osceola riding this Appaloosa horse with a spear that's on fire out in the middle of the football field. And so he had me go through some tests, and I rode some horses that I had, and he saw my riding ability, and he told us a little bit more about the program and kind of what it was about, and he invited us to come down for a spring game. So it would have been the spring game of 2008 is what it would have been, my senior year of high school. And he invited us to come down, and we got to see the horse on the field. The rider at the time was Chris Gannon. He rode for 1 year. He would have rode 2000, I guess it would have been the 2007, 08-07 season, or 07-08 season. And I got to see them in action on the field for the spring game. And I got a chance to ride Renegade 15 at the time and see the program kind of behind the scenes and see a little bit more about what it was, what was going on there. And I had the opportunity and the pleasure to be selected and receive a full scholarship, and came down, and I started my first game. I graduated high school, and 3 weeks later I enrolled in classes at FSU, taking summer classes and riding the horse 5 days a week because we were on a short schedule. Generally, there's an intern for the freshman, sophomore year, and then you ride your junior, senior year. And the rotation kind of got messed up. They had a rider that dropped out. Something happened. And so I was coming in on the tail end of Chris, and he was a senior, and I was a freshman, and I had the opportunity to come down and start. And my first game was Miami, 09, Labor Day.
Wait, so Drake, let me pause for a second. So your first game was Miami, Florida State, obviously a huge rivalry game. And you said you came into this not really a fan, right? So what was that environment like? Like, did you expect that? Did you expect what you walked into that night?
So not only was it my first game, I had never seen a collegiate football game in person in my life. I grew up 7 miles down a dirt road in Alabama, and I rode horses and rodeoed my whole life. I don't think I had ever seen more than a couple thousand people at one time at like a concert or something. And then I come in and I ride the horse, and he's like, "Man, this is a really big game." So here's a cool story. I wasn't supposed to ride that game because I was a freshman and because I was coming in not ever seeing FSU, not ever seeing anything in Doak Campbell. I wasn't supposed to ride Miami. They were going to bring Chris back and have him ride that first game, and then Jacksonville State was the second game. That's the perfect game for some greenhorn to come, start his career at a Jacksonville State game. Well, Chris came down with the flu the week of the Miami game. So I didn't find out that I was going to ride that game until Thursday before the game was on Monday. So my parents had to scramble and get down here and whatever else. But, man, it was wild. It was wild. To be the game, it was wild.
I cannot imagine. So, Chris, that is such a good introduction. So, really, because you mentioned Renegade 15, right? How many?
That's right.
So, what Osceola were you, or did you represent? And then, in the history of Osceolas, how many have there been? Because I imagine you guys are kind of a fraternity.
Yeah. So I actually misspoke. I was Chief Osceola 15.
Okay.
The horse I rode was Renegade 5.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay.
So Renegade 5, he's retired now. So I rode him 5 years out of the 9 years that he was Renegade. And for a horse to be called Renegade, they have to actively have the spear planted off of them at Doak Campbell for a football game. So there's been a bunch of practices. But throughout the years, right now, currently on Renegade 6.
Wow.
So the founding year, man, I'm getting fuzzy on it now. I think it was early 70, 72 maybe. Jim Kidder was the first Osceola, and there's only been, to date, 6 Renegades and 17 riders.
Wow. That's pretty remarkable. So
awesome.
Let me ask this: Do you guys kind of stay in touch as far as the folks who have represented Osceola? Do you guys stay in touch at all?
Do to a certain extent. I mean, you got to think there's a pretty big gap between a lot of us. I mean, I rode 5 years. Chris and I, we stay in touch occasionally. The guy before him, man, he actually passed away tragically. So there's kind of a pretty big age gap between us. I know Andy Taylor. He was one of the Osceolas. He's here in town. So we definitely do keep in touch. They do some I don't know what you want to call them, like a celebration kind of deal. I think they did it at 35, and they're going to do it again at 40. Well, they'll bring some people back, and we'll go out on the field and that kind of deal. So Renegade or Osceola 16 is Brendan Carter. He's a very, very good friend of mine. He's here locally as well. So he and I, we stay in touch constantly. I mean, we're all the time talking.
Gotcha. Phil, Croc, do you guys have any questions? Because I have 1,000 questions, but I don't want to monopolize the time here.
So you said the 09 Florida State Miami game, Labor Day weekend. That's your first game. So when you get on Renegade and you get ready to ride onto that field for the first time ever, like what's going through your mind? Like what's that feeling like for not only just for it being your first time, but like you said, it's a lot of firsts happening at one time, right? Your first football game, your first ride out on the field, and your first introduction to the great Florida State Miami rivalry.
That's right. So under pressure, like I said, I prepared the entire summer, and I was an accomplished equestrian. I rode a lot of horses. I was very prepared on that front. I didn't know what exactly to prepare for on the field, but I knew that I could ride that horse, and I knew that I had practiced, and I knew what my job was. And I'll tell you, I don't think that I heard the crowd until about the second quarter of Miami. Wow. Didn't even sink in, didn't even register, because it's like tunnel vision. I prepared, I knew what I had to do. I went out and I performed my job to the best ability that I could, and you just have to block the noise out. That's all you can do. It's the same thing that tell the players, and it's honestly it probably took until my second or third season before I could hear the crowd at the Spear. The first couple seasons when I played at the Spear, I didn't even know anybody else was in the stadium.
Wow. So, real quick, Crockett, I'll let you get a question in, but I do have a question that ties back to that. So, you because you came in as a freshman due to someone dropping out and kind of being there in 09, you may be one of the few who had a 4-year riding opportunity. Would that be a correct assumption?
So, I rode for 5 years.
Rode for 5, okay.
I think that Brendan, after me, he rode for 5. The current Osceola, he actually just graduated this past year. I think he actually tied my record, but I was the longest standing rider at my time for 5 years. Everybody else did it. There was a couple for 4. Most of them were 2 years.
Sure.
Because, like I said, you interned your freshman, sophomore year, and then you rode your junior, senior year. So it was kind of a rotation that they kept going, and I was the longest standing rider when I graduated. Then Brendan rode for 4 years, and I cannot remember. I don't personally know the current rider. He rode for 5 years as well. And then, like I said, this was his last year. I don't know who they've got coming in this next year.
Okay. Yeah, I guess my question, and you kind of answered it in a way, since you said like the first 2 years, I think you said you couldn't even really hear the crowd, right? But just electricity, like what was the most electric moment entering into Doak Campbell, just riding in, that you can think of?
So I'll tell you, probably the loudest game that I ever had was Oklahoma. It had to have been my junior year, the year before the national championship. It would have been 2012, I think. It was Oklahoma towards the end of the season. And I'm terrible with timelines. So does that sound about right? It's Oklahoma.
That's correct.
Yep. It was right at the end of the season. I've been in a bunch of loud games, but I can tell you that game was the loudest, most electric game that I've ever been a part of. It was
hands down. It was incredible. I was there.
It was amazing. I was in the building as well. That's the loudest I've ever heard though. Ever.
100%. I mean, there's like some official decibel records out there that I think we set that day.
Yeah, that was absolutely remarkable. Yeah, that was the game where there was Rashad Green, Clint Trickett hooked up for a touchdown, and that's one of the few games that I left the stadium actually feeling pretty good. Hey, we're back. We've made it. Right. We made it back, and there's good things on the horizon. Drake, I got a quick question. So you talked a little bit about the Durham family and how Alan specifically kind of identified and found you, right? Talk a little bit about the expectation as a student writer, right? Like, I'm sure that there's a standard that the Durham family holds those who represent Osceola too. Kind of talk a little bit about what that looks like.
Absolutely. So it actually started during the recruitment process. So one of the things that I had to do is I had to read a book called Light a Distant Fire. And it is an autobiography of Chief Osceola and the Seminole Wars and how that progressed and the transgressions that the U.S. had against the native tribes and everything that went on with the Seminoles. And, Osceola was not a chief of their tribe. He was a war chief. So there's two different lineages in the Seminole tribe. And the war chief is not of native blood, but that he's an actual battle chief. And that's what Osceola was. And I had to read that book, and I had to write a paper and send it to Alan. And the question was this: what would it mean for you to represent Osceola at FSU? And when you read into that, and what Alan was trying to get to is, it's not about the limelight. It's not about anything that I did or being cool or whatever people would think of it. But it's you're representing a legacy. You have a chance to step back in time and to represent a group of people that is unconquered by anyone. They are a free people because of what they did way back in the day. And what would it mean to me to represent that? That was the question that I had to answer. And, progressing through college, there was very strict expectations. We don't take sponsorships. We don't take my position. I was funded through the Alumni Association, but it was a scholarship that paid for my tuition. But we don't get any of the frills that go with it, because what we're doing is a gift back to the Seminole tribe. It's to pay honor and homage to a people that have gifted our symbol that we have as a football team. We're paying back for them. And I had very strict guidelines for staying out of trouble, all that fun stuff, and then also had to maintain a 3.0 or better GPA. They have very strict guidelines about that.
That's really, really cool to hear. And I guess with that said, talking about as a student, right? Because you, for all practical matters, were a student athlete, just not a student athlete at, representing Florida State, but in a different way. Right. Because you had practice, right? You had to uphold certain GPA requirements. You had all those things. It's good to hear. I mean, I think it's good even for our listeners to hear that standard is held honoring the tribe, right? And kind of what goes in that. A follow-up question to that is, going back to the tribe, what interactions did you have with the tribe as a student athlete?
So they are very integral with the entire program. So all of the regalia that we wear is authentic. So the tribe actually makes that. They don't make it for every rider, but I happen to be one of the larger riders that's ridden. I'm 6'5", about 230. So they had to make a new tunic, and they had to make new leggings. They had to make a new regalia for me because everything else was too small. So they're a very integral part, and they actually help design the entire regalia to make sure that it maintains its authenticity and that we're representing Osceola to the fullest extent that we can. And we've got representatives from the Seminole tribe. Ken Doney is one of the main guys that comes around the program a whole lot. He helps us with getting in touch with who we need to in the Seminole tribe. Kyle, his son, is part of the Alumni Association. He's not the president now. I'm not sure exactly what his position is, but Kyle is very instrumental in helping us maintain the authenticity, talking to the people that we need to. One of the really cool things, so Renegade only goes to FSU. They only go to Doak Campbell. We plant the spear at Doak Campbell. There are occasions where we go to bowl games as long as it's agreed upon with the other team and it's a neutral site. They bring their mascot. Osceola comes with Renegade. So I was able to ride the Orange Bowl, the Chick-fil-A Bowl, and then Pasadena. I went to 3 bowl games during my tenure. Another really cool thing that I got to do, which was the first time that it had ever happened, is we were invited to go to the Brighton Reservation, to the Seminole Reservation, and we did the Brighton Field Day Festival and Rodeo. So they do a great big celebration down there. It's a fun time, man. It is so much fun. The food is amazing. They make funnel cakes that are out of this world. But we got invited to come down, and I was the grand marshal of the parade. And so we got to do a really cool parade. Got to ride Renegade there on Seminole tribal ground. And for the rodeo, they actually had me come out, and they had asked us if we would do it. And Alan's like, of course, if the Seminole tribe's asking us, we're going to do this. We don't plant the spear anywhere else, but if it's tribal ground, buddy, we're there. And so I got to ride Renegade into the rodeo arena, doing the war chant, and rear him up and plant the spear on Seminole tribal ground. It was the first time in FSU history that had happened.
I just got chills. That's so cool.
That is amazing.
Yeah, I think being a Florida State fan, and when we think about everything that happened with, I guess, Washington Redskins, them losing their, the mascot because of just the negativity in the name Redskin. There was a time when I think I was a little nervous, a little afraid. What about Florida State? Are we going to be okay? But just to see just the buy-in from the tribe and with the university is just amazing. And so I know you just shared that encounter, but I mean, how did it feel to just be able just to represent such rich history during your time at Florida State?
Man, I'll tell you, that same trip to Brighton, I had the chance. I was sitting on Renegade, and the chief of the tribe at the time rode up on his horse, and he was sitting there talking to Alan. And he came over and talked to me. And when I'm in regalia, you're kind of in character, and it's very stern. And I don't smile, I don't talk. I'm kind of in character. But he rode up to me, and he looked me in the eye, and he reached over and he shook my hand, and he said, "I want to tell you how grateful I am for what you do." And when he said it, a tear literally was rolling down his cheek. And he said, "Because of you, Osceola rides again." And right there, that was the epitome of what I came to FSU to do, was that right there. It doesn't get any better than that.
Osceola rides again. I think that's the title of the pod. Osceola rides again. That's a moment, man. I had goosebumps, man. That's a moment.
Oh, that's absolutely incredible. So real quick, Drake, I got a question for you. So you talk about kind of being in character, right? And obviously going to Florida State games my whole life, that's something I've noticed. So 2 questions that kind of go along with that. Number 1, how long does the process take to get in character, right? From the makeup to the dress, etc. And then were there ever times where it was difficult to stay in character? Whether it's the course of the game or somebody in the crowd or, whatever the case may be, was it ever difficult to maintain the stern face and stay in character?
So the regalia, putting everything on, there's actually a really cool time-lapse video on YouTube. I don't know what the name of it is, but that somebody recorded the whole entire process. And it takes 45 minutes to an hour to get everything put on, from painting to all the regalia, everything ready to go. It's a pretty long process. And I tell you, one of the worst things is it is so hot. It is unbelievable because you wear a pair of blue jeans and then I've got a t-shirt on, and I wore tan Wrangler blue jeans and a tan shirt that was a Renegade team, just regular t-shirt. And then you put on leather leggings that go down to about your calf. And then you put on leather moccasins that overlap that and come almost to your knee. And then you put on this great big giant, very thick cloak, tunic kind of deal, and you wrap it up around you. And then you put on a black wig that's real human hair that is extremely hot. And then you wrap all of the rest of the stuff around there. So it was very warm. I'll say that. So there was definitely times where, the first part of the season where it is hot. It's hot for me. It's hot for the horse. There was definitely a few times where we were kind of cut it short. We're like, man, it's really warm today for the horse to be out there standing in the sun. So that was interesting at times. Staying in character. So I'll tell you a cool story about staying in character. This is not so much me maintaining character as it was being in character, but a very good friend of mine was the alumni or the student body president, and he came down on the field for halftime. And I always have to take pictures at halftime with whoever's down there. There's certain groups of people that come down and take pictures. And he got to come out on the field for halftime, but he didn't have the credentials to be there after halftime was over. And so he had brought a couple friends down, and they were on the field at halftime, and halftime was about to be over, and I was wrapping up my pictures, and I kind of turned, and I saw him over to my right, and he kind of waved at me, and there was an FSU PD officer that was trying to escort him off the field. And he pointed at me, and the officer looked at me, and I just, in character, just nodded, and he let him walk on the field. All it took was a nod, and he was like, okay, you're good to go. He knows you.
The chief.
It rides again, man.
Right. That's crazy. So staying in character, and now you're Chief Osceola. You've ingrained and adopted that persona. When did you finally become a fan of FSU football? When did that connection happen for you? Was it
about
instantly?
2 minutes into Miami Labor Day.
That's awesome.
I love that answer.
That's awesome, man.
It didn't take long at all.
Hey, so if I remember correctly, he became a fan before he even heard anything because he was still in television mode, right? Hey, so Drake, I got a question for you, and this is something you may or may not have even thought about this, but have you ever thought about the fact that there are some people who will go to Doak who their game day experience begins and ends with you? Have you ever thought about that?
Man, I've had people come and tell me. I've had elderly ladies that come to me and say, my favorite part, what I come to games for, is to see Osceola. And she said, I've had a lady that literally told me, I will leave after you get done sometime. Because I just want to come see you. Oh, yeah. So I've definitely had people tell me that before. It's wild to think of.
Well, and I'll tell you, I mean, I have my youngest child is 6, and we take her to football games. I have a 6, a 10, and a 14-year-old. And my 6-year-old could care less what's happening between the sidelines. She could care less about a football game being played. She might be able to tell you that it's a football game as opposed to other sports. Like, the entire objective of what she's there to do is to spotlight you. So from showing up pregame, finding, Osceola and Renegade on the horse, and then we always sat in the corner of the end zone, kind of opposite of where you would hang out over by the student section, right? So we're on the complete opposite corner. So that would be the south end zone on the home side. And so there were times kind of pregame where you would walk toward that end of the stadium as and I will tell you that for my daughter, her entire game day experience is tracking Osceola and Renegade. Kickoff happens, she doesn't care. She's not following the football. She's following Osceola and Renegade. So that's kind of what I mean is her entire game day experience begins and ends with Osceola and Renegade. From the time that we walk up the ramp onto the field to the time that you guys ultimately depart before the game ends, that's all she cares about. So I just thought it'd be kind of cool perspective. Like there's thousands of people cheering the football team. My daughter does the wave and tracks you.
Right. And it's known because even going outside of like the kids and fans, like even with us and we follow recruiting, and you hear recruits sometimes when they're talking about their game day experience, and some of them that's the one of the main things that is like you cannot beat Chief Osceola planting the spear. Even Derwin James, back when he was in high school, he was like, that is it. He said once he saw Chief Osceola plant the spear, he was a Nole. And that was when he was in high school. And now he's one of the best safeties in the NFL.
We can say, we can thank Drake for that because he would have been Osceola.
Yeah, it was a recruit. It literally was Drake. That's fun. That's crazy. That's crazy.
It's really funny how you're talking about that. We take team pictures every year. They come up and the band comes out and they do a dry run with Renegade. The band will get used to Renegade. If there's a new Renegade, he's kind of getting some field time, and so we kind of do a dry run every summer. And also at that time, a lot of the players come out and they do pictures with Osceola and Renegade. And I cannot for the life of me remember what his name was. But there was a guy that played football for us. This would have been 2010. And I'm sitting there taking pictures, kind of looking over to my right, and I could see a group of these guys walking up, and they were kind of chit-chatting, talking back and forth, and I could hear them like out of the corner of my ear. And one of them was saying, "Yeah, that's a robot." And he walked up to me. And he was a big dude. I mean, he put his arm like around me while I'm sitting on the horse kind of deal. But right before he did that, he was standing in front of me, and I was taking a picture looking over like this. And they were like, "Yeah, that's a robot, this, that, and the other." And I turned and looked at him, and I winked at him, and he lost it. He's like, "That ain't no damn robot. What are you talking about?"
That's awesome.
That's great. That's great.
Oh, goodness.
So I do have another quick question. So I know that Renegade is kept in a private location with the Durham family, and I know that Chief Osceola and Renegade, you guys usually at some point, I'm guessing third quarter, you could probably share with me, like there's a point in time where you guys leave, right, and you guys go. So my question is, are you part of the whole leaving thing back to the secret location, or do you then get to kind of dress down and go be a fan for the fourth quarter? Like, what was that like to be knowing you were in some intense football games, but then potentially not being able to see the end of them? Were you guys listening to the radio on the way back? Like, how did that work?
Absolutely. So most of the time, I was involved. I'll tell you, the worst thing was a noon kickoff, because that means that I was at the farm about 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. And we're getting everything ready, packing up, finishing everything that we need to. And then we're to the stadium 4 hours before kickoff minimum to get settled, to get Renegade out there on the field. We did a little dry run. We'd ride out there, let him settle down, come back in, get him some hay, get me cooled off, whatever, and get ready for the game. So, it was a long day to get ready for football. Most of the time, we would leave in the third or fourth quarter. We tried to stay for the fourth quarter so we could kind of do our fourth quarter deal where everybody shakes their keys, and I'd ride around and hold up four fingers, but like, "Yeah, buddy, it's the fourth quarter. You're losing." But we'd pack up and we'd head back to the ranch. So most of the time, I left with them. There was a few games where I got to kind of dress down, and I would jump up in the student section with some friends, or if my parents were here, some of those bigger games I got a chance to do that. The national championship was one of those times. Allen actually, he let most of the Renegade team kind of dress down, and we went back out on the field. And I was straddling the goal line, videoing Kelvin Benjamin catch that touchdown pass at Pasadena.
What a catch.
The guy that had the first marker literally put his first down marker in front of my camera as soon as he caught the ball. So I have the video, but you just can't.
Partially obstructed. I'm sure the celebration was obvious. You could hear the celebration.
Right.
I've actually Mickey Andrews. He was it Mickey Andrews? No, it wouldn't have been Mickey. It was our defensive line coach. I cannot remember his name.
But Higgins?
Yes. I watched him throw his hat at the national championship, and I watched it fly up in the air, and it landed back on the ground, and I ran over and picked it up, and I still have it to this day.
Wow.
That's awesome. Good stuff. Good stuff. Yeah, Odell is an institution for Florida State.
Right.
Yes, he is.
The only undefeated head coach.
That is correct.
That is absolutely correct.
That is correct.
Phil, do you guys have any other questions for Drake?
Man, I'm just sitting here in amazement. Like this is crazy. This is different, but an amazing different. So walk us through like Pasadena, like the travel, that game day experience. Of course, once you're in gear and on the field, you have like you said, a character that you have to uphold. But how difficult is that when you're Osceola, but you're at a championship game and you're a fan now? So how difficult is that?
Man, leading up to Pasadena, growing up in Alabama, I wasn't a huge football fan, but if I watched football, I was rooting for the Roll Tide. And so going up to the point where we're going to Pasadena, if you remember, the Iron Bowl that year was the whole I don't call it, but where they kicked they tried to get field goal, and they ended up running it back, and Auburn won, and that's the national championship. So leading up to it, I was very torn because I'm like, man, here I am riding Renegade. I am a Seminole through and through, but we're going to be playing Alabama. That's the home team. Like, man, at that point, that kind of sucks a little bit. Regardless of who wins, somebody's going to have feelings hurt. So, it was cool to have Auburn in there. Being at the game, they did a special thing, and they actually put me on a stage in front of the entire alumni association and all the FSU people that were there at Pasadena. And they had all of the paint and regalia and everything done. I was on stage in front of, 1,500, 2,000 people, getting all the makeup painted on and the wig and everything done. Get ready for the game.
What?
No pressure. No pressure.
Right, that's crazy.
At all.
So, hey, Drake, you had mentioned that so that kind of brings in another question. You mentioned that you met one of the current chiefs of the Seminole tribe down at that rodeo. Has the opportunity of being Osceola brought forth any other unique interactions, right? Like, or any other memorable where you got to meet somebody famous or something like that brought about because of the opportunity of being Osceola?
There was a couple. So I had a lady at a game that her boyfriend came up and took a picture, and I was like, man, I know her. I must have a class with her. Like, I can't remember what class I have with her, but I know her. I know her from somewhere. And we got done with the game, and one of the Renegade team members, they were like, Drake, you know who you took a picture with? I was like, who? They were like, that blonde-haired lady with her boyfriend that came and got a picture with you. That was Hulk Hogan's daughter. I'm like, no way.
Oh.
What?
I've seen her on TV.
Like Brooke or something. I think her name was Brooke.
Yeah, Brooke.
Hogan.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep. Yeah. Man, I'm here, but there is a country singer that is a huge FSU fan, and I cannot for the life of me what his name is.
There's a couple of guys from Jake Owen is from Tallahassee.
Jake Owen. Jake Owen came and got a picture with me. And again, I was like, man, I know that guy from somewhere. I've seen him around. And then afterward, they were like, man, do you know who you took a picture with? I was like, who?
That's awesome. That's awesome. Croc, you got any other questions?
Man, I think the time frame in which you were able to beat Chief Osceola is just impeccable. Really I mean, to transition under Jimbo Fisher, to see us rise back up to dominance, to experience national championship. I mean, those were the years. And of course, I mean, I was younger when we had our first dynasty, but those Jameis years, it was great to be it's always great to be a Nole. But man, my chest was sticking up high. I grew up in a household. My brother's a Gator fan. My dad's a Hurricane fan. And everybody in my household hates the Noles. And man, my chest was sticking out so big, man. So and to be here sitting with Chief Osceola that time frame, man, that's just awesome.
Yeah, man, this is amazing.
It was fun, man. You know, to start with Bobby Bowden, I was the last rider to ride under Bobby Bowden. And I actually handed the spear off to him when we played West Virginia. And there's actually a picture, you know, the book, like I think it's an autobiography of Bowden that has the team holding him up on their shoulders. Mm-hmm. I'm actually around, like you can't really tell me. I'm like in the back of the team. I got to dress down and I've got a black ball cap on. And I'm in the back of that picture. And, you know, to be part of the end of that dynasty, and like you said, moving into the new dynasty, it sucked the first couple years, man. We barely had a winning record the first couple years I was there, and then we rode the wave and we grew into what we are now. And I wasn't supposed to ride my fourth year because you're only supposed to ride for 4 years. And my apprentice at the time, he actually tore his meniscus and was unable to ride. And so they had invited me back for a fifth season. And I told him, as I was getting to the end of my senior season, I said, you realize what's going to happen, right? I said, we're going to get real close to winning the championship this year, but we might not make it all the way. But you know what's going to happen next year, your freshman year? You're going to win a national championship. Now, unfortunately, he didn't get to do that, but I did. So it was a crazy ride for sure.
You didn't want to go. Hey, you didn't want to go back to Pasadena anyway, right?
No.
So. Hey, Drake. I have one final question. I'll let the other two ask a question if they have any. I have one final question, and then really the last thing I think we can close with is you just kind of giving an update with what you're doing now, right? Like what keeps you occupied now. Croc or Phil, do you guys have any other final questions?
No,
I think this is a good one to end on. I think this is a good thing.
Okay. Yeah. So my last question for you is, so talk a little bit, and I think all the listeners should know at this point, but we recognize that there's a little different event that happens when Florida State hosts Florida as it relates to planting the spear, right? Talk a little bit about that, and then talk a little bit about kind of what that meant to you in that moment, because I guess you got an opportunity to do it twice.
I did, yep. So the FSU Florida game is, of course, a big rivalry game. And to signify that, Osceola normally rides up to the Seminole head, rears the horse, and plants the spear. To signify the defiance, if you want to say, of the Florida State game, we ride up to the Seminole head, we rear the horse up, and then we dismount, and then we plant the spear on foot. And man, that was one of the coolest things to do ever. I didn't know that was a deal until right up until the time I had to do it. I guess Alan was keeping me from getting butterflies or something, but he kind of didn't really talk a whole lot about it until he was like, all right, here's what we're going to do today. We're going to come out there, you're going to rear the horse up, but I don't want you to plant the spear. I want you to let it come down. I want you to hop off, and I want you to present the spear in a certain way, and then boom, stick it right in front of them. And so that was a cool deal. That was a very cool deal to get to do. I've got one other story. So Mickey Andrews, when he retired, like I said, there's a routine. Renegade runs up to the Seminole head, rears up, you plant the spear. I always did it as he was coming down out of the rear, and then boom, we were off the Seminole head, headed towards the end zone. Again, I didn't know that this was a deal until the day that we were there, but Mickey Andrews was going to retire, and Alan's like, hey, we've got a special spear plant today. You're actually going to hand the spear to me, and I'm going to give it to Mickey, and he's going to plant the spear. And I'm like, okay, that's not a big deal. Like, I'll rear him up. We'll hit the ground. I'll hand it to you. We'll be good to go. Well, Carter is the horse's name. He's retired now, but that's his barn name. Carter and I, we had a rhythm, man. We hit the Seminole head. Boom, we're up. We're on the way down. Bam, you hit the spear, and you're off. Well, I hit the Seminole head. I rear up. Did a pretty good rear. It wasn't one of my best, but we get up, we come down, and like I said, we had a rhythm. Mm-hmm. And today the rhythm was off because I had to stop him and I had to hand the spear off. Well, when he comes down, he goes to lunge forward like we always do, and I had to, whoa, buddy, we got to stop. Well, when I did that, he thought that I wanted him to actually rear higher. So that game, I had Riles Lee as one of the photographers at FSU, and he had a series of pictures because he stood up on his rear end, and literally my head was hid behind his neck, and he walked on his hind end. He took 3 full steps on his hind end walking, and then finally started to come down. I can tell you right now, that is the closest that I've ever come to falling off of him.
Wow.
Alan is now, he's 10 feet behind me, and he's trying to run forward to get to me, and I had to turn around and hand the spear off. And if he had not maintained a straight line leaving the Seminole head, I probably would have fallen off because I was completely exposed. That's like a wide receiver out in the flat, completely stretched out with a middle linebacker like about ready to eat him up.
Wow. That's incredible. I could listen to these stories all night, Drake. I really, really appreciate the time. Tell us what you're up to now. Like, so you I think you had mentioned kind of as we were talking a little bit before we kicked off the podcast that you're back in the Tallahassee area, right?
That's right.
So talk a little bit about what you do now.
So I graduated. I ended up sticking around here local. I met my beautiful wife. She's a Tallahassee native, born and raised here. And we have settled out in Monticello. We've got a little ranch out here. We've got horses and cows and dogs and pigs and all kinds of things out here. Nice. So we're local. We stick around here. We actually met in the arena riding horses. She barrel races locally here, and like I said, I team roped and everything. So we met at one of my really good friends' houses at his practice arena. That's actually also where we got married. He actually took an online little course to become a minister so that he could marry us at the rodeo arena. So that's where we got married, and we've got a little place here, just living the dream out here in Monticello.
That's awesome.
Beautiful.
Love to hear it. Well, Drake, do you guys have kids?
Nope, no kids yet. We're planning on coming yet.
I was going to say that's got to be a fun story, or I would imagine that would be a fun story for some of the older Osceolas, right? To know that their dad was that guy, right? Like that's a cool perspective. So I actually I had an opportunity to work. I work with Ginger Madden, which is Coach Bowden's daughter, and I've asked her and her son, like, what do you recognize that you were Coach Bowden's daughter or Coach Bowden's grandson? Like, your perspective of college football has to be completely skewed, right? Like you were royalty, especially in Tallahassee. So listen, Drake, such an honor to be able to have this conversation, man. We really, really, really appreciate it. Again, I've been a Florida State fan my entire life, and these are some of the coolest stories that I've heard that I would have never thought. You know, you hear about all the different sports things, or you hear about things that happen at practice and all those kind of little unique things that happen. But this is definitely a perspective that I've never heard before, and I'm really appreciative for you taking the time.
Yes. Absolutely. I appreciate the opportunity. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Thanks again.
Thank you for your time, Dre. We really appreciate it.
All right, Croc, you want to close us out?
Yep. As always, it's great to be a Nole. So Third and Nole. We out.
We're out.